The dust rose like a curtain as Olivia Matthews crumpled to the floor of her empty kitchen, her sobs echoing against the bare wooden walls of the homestead she'd fought so desperately to keep. It was 1879, 3 months since her husband's death, and the cruel Oklahoma territory had finally broken her spirit as completely as it had emptied her cupboards. Thunder rolled across the plains outside her window, promising rain that would come too late for her withered crops. At 22, Olivia had already witnessed more heartache than most endured in a lifetime. She traveled west with Thomas filled with dreams of prosperity, only to watch him succumb to fever while their land surrendered to drought. Now she was alone, hungry and facing the bitter truth that she might not survive another week. She didn't hear the approaching hoofbeats over her weeping, didn't notice the tall shadow that fell across her doorway until a man's deep voice cut through her despair. "Madam, are you all right in there?" Olivia scrambled to her feet, hastily wiping tears from her dirt-streaked face. She hadn't bothered locking the door. There was nothing left to steal. Standing in her doorway was a stranger, hat in hand, concern etched across his sun-weathered face. "I'm fine," she lied, her voice cracking from thirst and emotion. "Please leave." The man didn't move. His eyes, startlingly blue against his tanned skin, took in the barren kitchen, the empty cupboards with their doors flung open in desperation, and finally, her trembling form. "Name's Jake Daniels," he said quietly. "Was passing through to Guthrie when I heard crying. Thought someone might be in trouble." "The trouble's already done its worst," Olivia replied bitterly. "Unless you can make wheat grow without rain or bring my husband back from the dead, there's nothing to be done here." Jake's gaze softened. "I can't do either of those things, madam, but I can fill those cupboards. No one should go hungry, least of all a woman facing this hardship alone." Olivia stiffened with pride. "I don't take charity." "It's not charity," Jake said, stepping inside and setting his hat on the table. "It's what neighbors do, even temporary ones. I've got supplies on my wagon that'll keep you fed while we figure out something more permanent." "We." The word escaped her lips before she could stop it. Jake's smile was tentative but warm. "I don't make promises I can't keep, and I won't leave a fellow soul to starve. Now, you sit and rest while I bring in some provisions." Too exhausted to argue further, Olivia sank into the room's only chair and watched as the stranger walked back to his wagon. She should have been frightened of a man inviting himself into her home, but something in his straightforward manner and honest eyes calmed her fears. Within minutes he returned, arms loaded with sacks of flour, beans, salt pork, and other necessities. Trip after trip, he stocked her barren shelves until the small kitchen looked more abundant than it had even when Thomas was alive. Finally, he set a small sack of coffee beans on the table in front of her, a luxury she hadn't enjoyed in months. Olivia's eyes welled with fresh tears. "Why would you do this for a stranger?" Jake knelt before her, his expression serious. "Because 8 years ago, I was starving in a mining camp when someone did the same for me. He told me that when I got back on my feet, I should pass it forward." His calloused hand briefly covered hers. "You'll never go hungry again, not if I have anything to say about it." The sincerity in his voice broke through the walls of grief she'd built around herself. For the first time in months, Olivia felt something beyond despair, a faint, fragile hope that perhaps she wasn't as alone as she'd believed. "I'm Olivia," she whispered. "Olivia Matthews," Jake nodded. "Well, Mrs. Matthews, that storm's about to break. If you've no objections, I'll tend to my horses and bed down in your barn tonight. Tomorrow, we can talk about getting your place back in working order." As if commanded by his words, the first heavy raindrops began to hammer against the roof. Olivia looked at the suddenly full cupboards, at the stranger who had appeared like an answer to prayers she'd been too bitter to offer, and managed a small nod. "The barn's yours, Mr. Daniels, and thank you, Jake," he corrected gently. "And you're welcome, Olivia." Outside, the parched earth drank in the rain, and inside, a seed of something unexpected took root between two strangers brought together by emptiness and the promise of fullness to come. The storm raged through the night, a thunderous welcome to the rain that had been absent for so long. Olivia slept better than she had in months, lulled by the sound of water on the roof and the knowledge that her cupboards were no longer empty. When dawn broke, she was surprised to find smoke already rising from her cook-stove. Jake stood at her kitchen table, slicing salt pork into a cast-iron skillet. "Hope you don't mind," he said, noting her startled expression. "Thought you could use a proper meal." Olivia tied her apron over her worn dress, feeling suddenly self-conscious of her appearance. She'd been too numb with grief to care about such things, but now, with a stranger in her kitchen, a handsome stranger at that, she was acutely aware of her tangled hair and the hollowness of her cheeks. "You didn't have to do that," she said, moving toward the stove. "I can cook." Jake stepped aside. "Never said you couldn't, but I make a decent breakfast and you look like you could use the extra rest." Olivia couldn't argue with that assessment. She hadn't had a full night's sleep since Thomas fell ill. "Where did you learn to cook?" "Trail drives, mostly," Jake replied, cracking eggs into the skillet beside the pork. "Was a chuck wagon cook's assistant for a spell. Man named Hank Taylor, ornery as they come but a wizard with cast iron and campfire." Olivia found herself smiling, a small, rusty thing, but a smile nonetheless. "My mother would be scandalized to see me letting a man cook in my kitchen." "Well," Jake chuckled, "my father would be equally scandalized to see me doing the cooking. Guess we're both breaking some rules this morning." As they ate, Olivia learned that Jake had been a cowhand since he was 16, working cattle drives from Texas to Kansas before the railroads changed everything. Now 30 years old, he'd saved enough to buy his own small herd and was on his way to claim land near Guthrie. "The territory's opening up," he explained. "Figure it's time to put down roots." "It's not easy," Olivia warned, thinking of all she and Thomas had endured. "The land can be cruel." Jake's eyes met hers. "Most worthwhile things come with struggle, Mrs. Matthews." "Olivia," she corrected, echoing his words from the night before. "If you're cooking in my kitchen, you might as well use my name." After breakfast, Jake insisted on surveying the property. Olivia showed him the withered cornfield, the small garden that had yielded nothing but disappointment, and the chicken coop where only 3 hens remained of the dozen they'd started with. "Your soil's good," Jake observed, crumbling the rain-dampened earth between his fingers. "Just needed water. This rain will help, and with some work, you could have this place productive again before winter." "I can't pay you," Olivia said bluntly, not asking to be paid. Jake stood, wiping his hands on his denims. "But I do have a proposition. I need a place to stay while I set up my own operation." "You need help getting this place back on its feet. What if I camp here, help with the heavy work, and in exchange, you provide a meal and conversation now and then?" Olivia frowned. "People will talk." "Let them," Jake shrugged. "I'll sleep in the barn, work honest hours, and be on my way once you're stable. Nothing improper about neighbors helping neighbors." "We're not neighbors yet," Olivia pointed out. Jake smiled. "Geography's just details, madam. Neighborliness is a state of mind." Despite her reservations, Olivia couldn't deny she needed help. The work was too much for one person, especially one weakened by grief and hunger. And there was something about Jake Daniels that inspired trust, a steadiness in his gaze, a reliability in his movements that reminded her of the good men she'd known growing up. "1 week," she conceded. "We'll see how it goes." 1 week stretched into 2, then a month. Jake repaired the leaking roof, rebuilt the chicken coop, and helped Olivia plant a late garden that thrived in the newly rain-soaked earth. The cupboards remained full, and slowly, Olivia's face lost its gaunt appearance as regular meals restored her strength. They fell into an easy routine. Jake would work from dawn until mid-afternoon on Olivia's homestead, then ride to his own land to continue building his small cabin. He'd return by dusk, and they would share supper, talking long into the evening about everything and nothing. Olivia learned that Jake had lost his parents to a cholera outbreak when he was 14, that he could play the harmonica but only knew 3 songs, and that he had an uncanny ability to predict weather changes by the way his left shoulder ached. In turn, she shared stories of her childhood in Missouri, her brief courtship with Thomas, and their journey west full of optimism and naivete. "We were so certain everything would work out," she confessed one evening as they sat on the porch watching fireflies rise from the newly growing wheat field. "Thomas had such plans, a big house, children running in the yard, cattle grazing as far as the eye could see." Jake was quiet for a moment. "Dreams don't die with the dreamer, you know. They just need new caretakers." Olivia glanced at him, struck by the simple wisdom of his words. "Is that what you're doing with your land, caretaking dreams?" "Something like that," he acknowledged. "My pa always wanted land of his own, never got it. Figure I'm finishing what he started." As summer gave way to early autumn, Olivia noticed subtle changes in herself. She began taking care with her appearance again, pinching color into her cheeks before Jake returned each evening. She found herself laughing more easily, looking forward to their conversations, and occasionally catching herself watching the way his hands moved as he worked, strong, capable hands that had brought life back to her failing farm. The townsfolk noticed the changes too. When Olivia rode into Guthrie for supplies, whispers followed her. The young widow and the drifter Cowboy. Some of the whispers were unkind, laden with insinuations that made her cheeks burn. Mrs. Whitaker, the general store owner's wife, was particularly pointed. "Must be convenient having a man around again," she remarked as she wrapped Olivia's purchases. "Especially one as handsome as your helper." "Mr. Daniels is a neighbor being neighborly," Olivia replied stiffly. "Nothing more." "Of course, dear," Mrs. Whitaker smiled thinly. "Though if I were you, I'd make sure he stays neighborly. Men have needs after all, and a widow alone." Olivia left the store with her cheeks flaming. The comments stung, not just because of their impropriety, but because lately she'd found herself wondering what it would be like if Jake were more than just a helpful neighbor. These thoughts both thrilled and terrified her. It had been only 6 months since Thomas died, and the idea of having feelings for another man felt like a betrayal. That evening, she was unusually quiet as they ate supper. Jake noticed immediately. "Something happened in town?" he asked, passing her the cornbread. Olivia hesitated, then decided honesty was best. "People are talking about us, about you staying here." Jake set down his fork. "Does that bother you?" "It should," she admitted. "But what bothers me more is that I'm starting not to care what they think, and that feels disloyal to Thomas." Jake's expression softened. "Your husband sounds like he was a good man who loved you very much. Would he have wanted you to be alone and struggling, or safe and moving forward?" Tears pricked at Olivia's eyes. "Moving forward, of course, but it's been such a short time and I never expected to." To what?" Jake prompted gently when she trailed off. Olivia looked away, unable to voice the confusing feelings growing inside her. "To depend on someone else so quickly," she finished instead. Jake seemed to understand what she wasn't saying. He reached across the table, his fingers briefly touching hers. There's no proper timeline for healing, Olivia, and depending on others isn't weakness, it's just being human. His touch sent warmth spreading through her, a feeling so unexpected and welcome that she pulled her hand back in alarm. "Perhaps it would be better if you didn't stay here anymore," she said, the words painful even as she spoke them. "Your cabin must be nearly finished by now." Hurt flashed across Jake's face, quickly masked. "If that's what you want," he said evenly, "I wouldn't want to damage your reputation." "It's not about my reputation," Olivia protested. It's complicated," Jake nodded. "Life usually is." He stood from the table. "I'll pack my things tonight and be out of your barn by morning." Olivia wanted to call him back, to explain the tumult of emotions that had prompted her hasty words, but pride and confusion held her silent. She watched him walk out to the barn, his shoulders straight and his step deliberate, and felt as though she were losing something precious before she'd even fully recognized its value. That night, Olivia slept fitfully, torn between relief at having made the proper, respectable decision and a deep sense of impending loss. She rose before dawn, determined to thank Jake properly for all he'd done before he left. The barn door was already open when she approached, lantern in hand. Jake was saddling his horse, his belongings packed and ready on the wagon he'd arrived with months ago. "I made some breakfast," she said softly, "and packed provisions for your ride." Jake turned, his expression carefully neutral. "That's kind of you." In the lantern light, his eyes looked tired, as if he too had passed a sleepless night. "It's the least I can do after everything you've done for me," Olivia replied. "I don't know how I would have survived without your help." "You're stronger than you give yourself credit for," Jake said. "This farm's back on its feet because of your determination as much as my labor." Olivia swallowed hard, fighting unexpected tears. "Will you at least eat before you go?" Jake hesitated, then nodded. "I suppose I could do with coffee." They walked back to the house in silence, the first awkward silence they'd shared since that initial rainy night. In the kitchen, Olivia poured coffee while Jake stood uncomfortably by the door, as if reluctant to reclaim his familiar place at her table. "I'm sorry if I offended you last night," Olivia said finally. "I didn't mean to sound ungrateful." "You didn't," Jake assured her. "You're right to be concerned about what people think. A woman alone has to be careful of her reputation." "It wasn't just that," Olivia admitted, staring into her coffee cup. "I'm afraid." "Of what?" "Of feeling again," she whispered. "Of caring for someone and losing them. Of betraying Thomas's memory." Jake set his cup down and crossed the kitchen to stand before her. "Olivia, loving again doesn't betray what you had with your husband. It honors, it shows that he taught you how to love well enough that you're brave enough to risk it again." Olivia looked up at him, struck by the earnestness in his face. "Is that what this is? Love?" Jake's gaze never wavered. "I can only speak for myself, but I know that when I found you weeping over those empty cupboards, something in me recognized something in you. And every day since then has only strengthened that feeling." Olivia's heart hammered in her chest. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Jake replied gently. "I'm not asking for promises, just don't send me away because you're afraid of what might happen. Send me away if that's truly what you want." Olivia closed her eyes, searching her heart for truth. When she opened them again, she found clarity. "I don't want you to go," she admitted, "but I need time to be certain, to grieve properly." Jake's smile held relief and understanding. "Time I can give you. I'll finish my cabin, get my operation running properly. We'll be neighbors, real ones, just a few miles apart. No need to rush anything else." Olivia nodded, grateful for his understanding. "I'd like that." As promised, Jake moved to his own property that day. The separation was both painful and necessary, giving Olivia space to sort through her conflicting emotions while knowing he was close enough if she needed help. They established a new routine. Jake would ride over once a week to assist with heavier chores, and sometimes Olivia would visit his steadily improving cabin, bringing baked goods or preserves from her reviving garden. Autumn deepened, painting the Oklahoma landscape in rich golds and reds. Olivia's wheat field yielded a modest harvest, enough to see her through the winter with some to sell in town. The rebuilt chicken coop now housed a dozen healthy hens, and 2 milk cows grazed in the small pasture, a gift from Jake that she had initially protested, but eventually accepted as a business proposition, when he insisted on taking a share of the butter and cheese she produced. Their relationship evolved slowly, carefully, like a tender shoot growing toward sunlight. Each time Jake visited, Olivia found herself watching the clock hours before his arrival, her heart quickening at the sound of approaching hoofbeats. Their conversations grew deeper, more personal, punctuated by lingering glances and occasional, accidental touches that sent electricity through her veins. By the first snowfall in early December, Olivia could no longer deny that what she felt for Jake Daniels was far more than friendship or gratitude. The realization came one evening as they sat by her fire, Jake carefully repairing a broken chair while she mended a shirt. The domesticity of the scene, the comfortable silence between them, filled her with a sense of rightness she hadn't expected to feel again. "Jake," she said suddenly, setting aside her needle. "I'm ready." He looked up, his hands stilling on the chair. "Ready for what?" "To stop pretending that I'm not in love with you." The words hung in the air between them, bold and irrevocable. Jake set the chair aside slowly, his eyes never leaving her face. "Are you certain?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. Olivia nodded. "I've had months to think about it. To make peace with my past. And I know now that Thomas would want me to be happy. That loving you doesn't diminish what I had with him, it's just different. A new chapter." Jake crossed the room and knelt before her chair, taking her hands in his. "I've loved you since that first night, I think. When you stood in this kitchen with empty cupboards and more pride than most men I've known." His thumb traced circles on her palm. "I promised you'd never go hungry again, and I meant it not just for food, but for companionship, for joy, for all the things that make life worth living." Olivia felt tears spill down her cheeks, but they were different from the desperate tears Jake had first witnessed. These were born of hope, of possibility. "I believe you," she whispered. When he kissed her, it was gentle and questioning at first, then deeper as she responded with a passion that surprised them both. It felt like coming home to a place she'd never been before, familiar and new all at once. As winter settled over the territory, Jake and Olivia's courtship blossomed despite the harsh weather. He began spending more nights at her farm, properly sleeping in the spare room to maintain propriety, but sharing long evenings by the fire. They talked of the future, of combining their operations, of the children they might have, of the life they could build together. The townsfolk still whispered, but the nature of the whispers changed. The young widow and the cowboy were now a proper courtship, their story romanticized rather than scandalized. Even Mrs. Whittaker had to admit that Jake Daniels had proven himself a respectable, hard-working man who had brought the Matthews farm back from ruin. Christmas approached, bringing with it a sense of anticipation. Olivia decorated her small home with pine boughs and red ribbons, determined to celebrate properly for the first time since Thomas's death. Jake arrived on Christmas Eve with his arms full of packages and a sprig of mistletoe he hung mischievously in the doorway. "Got something special for you," he said after they'd exchanged gifts by the fire. "Something I've been saving." From his pocket, he withdrew a small box wrapped in silver paper. Olivia opened it with trembling fingers to find a delicate gold ring set with a small but perfect diamond. "It was my mother's," Jake explained. "The only thing of hers I managed to keep after she passed." Olivia looked up at him, her heart in her throat. "Jake." He took her hands in his. "Olivia Matthews, when I found you weeping over empty cupboards, I had no idea I was finding the other half of my soul. I promised you'd never go hungry again, and now I'm promising you'll never be alone again either if you'll have me as your husband." Through happy tears, Olivia nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll have you." Their wedding took place on New Year's Day of 1880, a simple ceremony in Guthrie's small church with the few friends they'd made in the territory. Olivia wore a dress of deep blue wool, her cheeks flushed with happiness rather than the fever of grief that had hollowed them just months before. Jake stood tall and proud in a new suit, his eyes never leaving his bride as they spoke their vows. "You have filled not just my cupboards, but my heart," Olivia told him as they shared their first dance as husband and wife in the community hall. "And I will spend the rest of my life making sure yours never empties." Jake's arms tightened around her. "With you by my side, Mrs. Daniels, I'll always be the richest man in the territory." They combined their operations, Jake moving permanently to Olivia's farm while maintaining his own land for grazing his growing herd. Together, they expanded both properties, adding a new wing to the house, improving the barn and gradually acquiring more livestock. Their days were filled with hard work, but their evenings were filled with laughter, conversation, and increasingly, passion. Spring brought new growth to the land, and to their family Olivia discovered she was expecting their first child just as the first green shoots appeared in the wheat fields. Jake's reaction was a mixture of elation and tender concern, his hands constantly finding excuses to touch her growing belly, his eyes following her with protective vigilance. "I never thought I'd have this," he confessed one night as they lay in bed, his hand resting on the gentle swell that housed their child. A home, a wife, a baby on the way. After years of drifting, it seemed like something that happened to other men. Olivia covered his hand with hers. "And I never thought I'd have a second chance at happiness. We're both getting miracles we didn't expect." Their son, Samuel Thomas Daniels, was born on a crisp October morning in 1880, arriving with a lusty cry that announced his healthy lungs to the world. Jake paced outside the bedroom during the delivery, nearly wearing a path in the floorboards until the midwife finally called him in to meet his son. "He's perfect," Jake whispered, cradling the tiny bundle with hands that seemed suddenly too large and rough for such a delicate task. "Look what we made, Olivia." She watched them through exhausted but joyful eyes, her heart so full it felt it might burst. "Two miracles," she murmured. "The baby and finding you." Their family grew as steadily as their prosperity. A daughter, Elizabeth Rose, joined them in 1882, followed by twin boys, Michael and James, in 1884. The Matthews-Daniels farm became one of the most successful operations in the area, known for its fine cattle and abundant harvests. Through it all, Jake kept his original promise. The cupboards in their expanding home were always full, a fact he took particular pride in. On difficult days, and there were still difficult days, with drought years, cattle sickness, and the normal hardships of frontier life, he would remind Olivia of how far they had come from that desperate rainy night when he'd first found her. "Remember when you were weeping over those empty shelves?" he'd say, wrapping his arms around her from behind as she prepared meals for their growing brood. "Now look at us." And Olivia would lean back into his embrace, grateful beyond words for the twist of fate that had brought a lonely cowboy to her door on the darkest day of her life. What had begun as a simple act of kindness, filling empty cupboards, had filled their lives with something far more precious, a love that sustained them through every season. By 1890, their eldest son was 10, already showing his father's aptitude for working with horses and his mother's quiet determination. Their farm had expanded to include 300 acres of wheat and a herd of nearly 200 cattle. The original farmhouse had been expanded twice, with a proper second floor and a wide, welcoming porch where the family gathered on summer evenings. Guthrie had grown as well, from a small frontier outpost to a bustling town, especially after the land run of 1889 brought thousands of settlers to the territory. Jake and Olivia watched the transformation with mixed feelings, grateful for the improved amenities and services, but sometimes nostalgic for the wilder, more open days of their early marriage. Remember when we could ride for hours without seeing another soul? Jake mused one evening as they sat on their porch, watching their children play in the yard while the sun set in a blaze of orange and gold. Now there's a homestead every few miles. Progress, I suppose, Olivia replied, her hand finding his. Though I'm glad we had those quiet years first. Jake squeezed her fingers. I'd take any years with you, quiet or busy. Their marriage had deepened over the decade, weathering the typical storms of any long relationship, disagreements over how to raise the children, occasional financial worries during leaner years, the normal friction that comes from two strong-willed people sharing a life. But beneath these surface ripples ran a current of unshakable devotion, a foundation built on that first promise made over empty cupboards. In the spring of 1892, they faced their most serious challenge since those early days. A severe outbreak of cattle fever swept through the territory, decimating herds throughout the region. Jake worked himself to exhaustion trying to save their animals, isolating the sick ones, treating them with every remedy known to ranchers, and ultimately having to destroy many to prevent further spread. We might lose everything, he admitted one night, collapsing into a chair after 18 hours of grueling work. His face was haggard, his hands raw from the caustic medicines they'd been using on the cattle. If this keeps up, we'll be back to where we started. Olivia knelt before him, taking his battered hands in hers. No, she said firmly, we will never be back there. Even if we lost every head of cattle, every acre of wheat, we would still have each other and the children. That's not where we started, Jake. We started with two people who were willing to fight for a future together. Jake looked into her eyes, drawing strength from the unwavering faith he found there. You're right, he conceded. We've faced worse. And we've overcome it, Olivia reminded him. Whatever happens with the herd, we'll rebuild, together. Her confidence proved justified. Though they lost nearly half their cattle to the fever, their diversified operation meant they didn't face financial ruin. The wheat crop that year was exceptional, compensating somewhat for the livestock losses. By working together, reaching out to neighbors for help and offering assistance in return, the community weathered the crisis. As they rebuilt their herd over the next 2 years, Olivia often thought about how different this challenge had been from the one she'd faced alone after Thomas died. Having a partner to share the burden, to provide perspective when despair threatened to overwhelm her, made all the difference in the world. They celebrated their 15th wedding anniversary in 1895 with a grand party that brought together friends and neighbors from miles around. Their children, Sam, now 15, Elizabeth 13, and the twins 11, helped plan the celebration, revealing secret preparations that touched both parents deeply. They've arranged for a photographer from Oklahoma City, Jake told Olivia as they dressed for the party. Want to capture the whole family together. Olivia smiled, pinning up her hair, which now showed strands of silver among the brown. That will be nice. We don't have enough pictures. The party lasted well into the night, with music, dancing, and tables groaning under the weight of food brought by well-wishers. As darkness fell, lanterns illuminated the yard, casting a golden glow over the gathering. Jake pulled Olivia aside during a lively fiddle tune, leading her to a quiet corner of the porch. "Got something for you," he said, producing a small velvet box. 15 years deserve something special. Inside was a delicate gold locket engraved with their initials. When Olivia opened it, she found a tiny photograph of their family on one side and on the other, a pressed flower. "Is this?" she began, recognizing the dried prairie wildflower. Jake nodded. "From the first bouquet I ever brought you, back when I was still sleeping in your barn and trying not to fall in love with you too obviously." His smile was tender with memory. "You put them in a jar on the table, and I thought it was the prettiest sight I'd ever seen until you smiled at me over dinner that night." Tears welled in Olivia's eyes. "You kept this all these years. Some things you just know are important, even at the time," Jake replied simply. "That flower marked the first day you looked at me like I might be more than just the man who filled your cupboards." Olivia closed her hand around the locket. "You've been filling my life with beautiful things ever since, Jake Daniels. Not just food and shelter, but love and purpose and joy." He drew her into his arms, still as strong and steady as they had been on that first rainy night. "And you've given me roots, Olivia Daniels, a place to belong after a lifetime of drifting." As they rejoined the celebration, moving among friends and neighbors who had witnessed their journey from desperate strangers to pillars of the community, Olivia marveled at how life could change so completely. The empty cupboards that had once represented her lowest moment had become the beginning of her greatest happiness. The years continued to pass, bringing new challenges and joys. Their children grew, each finding their own path. Sam, the eldest, showed a keen mind for business and eventually partnered with his father in expanding their ranching operation. Elizabeth, their daughter, developed a passion for teaching and helped establish Guthrie's first proper school. The twins, different in temperament but united in their love of adventure, took turns managing the farm and exploring the changing territory. Oklahoma achieved statehood in 1907, transforming the frontier they had known into something more settled and civilized. Jake and Olivia, now in their late 50s and early 50s respectively, watched these changes with the perspective of those who had helped build the community from its earliest days. "Sometimes I hardly recognize the place," Jake remarked as they drove their buggy through Guthrie streets, now lined with proper buildings and bustling with activity. "Remember when this was just a dusty crossroads with a general store and a saloon?" Olivia nodded, thinking of how frightened and alone she had felt on her infrequent trips to town after Thomas died. "It's grown up, just like we have." They were grandparents now, with Sam's 2 children and Elizabeth's newborn bringing fresh energy to family gatherings. The farm remained the heart of their extended family, the place where everyone returned for holidays and celebrations, drawn by the warmth and abundance that Jake and Olivia had created together. On a quiet evening in the summer of 1910, 30 years after Jake had first found Olivia weeping over her empty cupboards, they sat together on the porch of the home they had built, watching another magnificent Oklahoma sunset paint the sky in shades of fire. Jake's hair had gone completely silver, and lines mapped his weathered face, but his blue eyes were as bright and clear as the day they'd met. Olivia's own hair had faded to a soft gray, and her hands showed the evidence of decades of hard work, but her smile remained as radiant as ever when she looked at her husband. "Penny for your thoughts," Jake said, noticing her contemplative expression. "I was thinking about promises," Olivia replied, "and how a simple one changed everything." Jake took her hand, his touch still sending a current of warmth through her after all these years. "Which promise was that? You'll never go hungry again," Olivia quoted, her voice soft with memory. "That's what you told me when you filled my cupboards that night." Jake's eyes crinkled at the corners as he smiled. "Best promise I ever made, and the easiest to keep, as it turned out." "It wasn't just about food," Olivia said thoughtfully. "It was about never being empty again, not my home, not my heart, not my life." "And has that held true?" Jake asked. "After all these years?" Olivia leaned against his shoulder, feeling the solid strength that had supported her through decades of joy and sorrow, triumph and struggle. "More than true," she assured him. "My cup runneth over, as the good book says." They sat in comfortable silence as the last rays of sunlight faded and the first stars appeared overhead. From inside the house came the sounds of their family children's laughter, adult conversation, the clatter of dishes being cleared from dinner. The cupboards in their kitchen were still full, as they had been every day since Jake Daniels had ridden into Olivia Matthews' life with saddlebags of provisions and a heart full of unspoken promises. "Thank you," Olivia said suddenly, turning to look directly into her husband's beloved face. "For what?" Jake asked. "For hearing me weeping that day, for stopping instead of riding on." Her voice caught slightly. "For filling more than just my cupboards." Jake leaned forward to place a gentle kiss on her lips, a kiss that held 3 decades of shared memories. "Best detour I ever took," he murmured against her mouth, "and I'd do it all again in a heartbeat." As night settled fully over their land, they remained on the porch, 2 figures silhouetted against the warm light spilling from their home, a beacon of love that had grown from the simplest of promises made in the darkest of times. From empty cupboards to overflowing hearts, their journey had been one of unexpected grace, proving that even in the wild harshness of frontier life, love could take root and flourish beyond all reasonable expectation. And in the years that followed, as their grandchildren grew, and eventually, their great-grandchildren came to know the story of how their family began with a weeping woman, empty cupboards, and a cowboy's promise, the legacy of Jake and Olivia Daniels continued to nourish generations. Their love story became part of the fabric of Oklahoma itself, a testament to the power of compassion, determination, and the courage to begin again when all seems lost. In 1920, as they celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary surrounded by their extensive family, 90-year-old Jake Daniels raised a toast to his 82-year-old bride. Though his voice had grown frailer with age, the sentiment behind his words remained as strong as ever. "To Olivia," he said, his blue eyes still bright with devotion, "who taught me that the greatest wealth a man can have isn't measured in cattle or land, but in the love he gives and receives. Here's to the woman who made a drifting cowboy into a man with roots deep enough to weather any storm." Olivia raised her own glass, her hand still steady after decades of hard work. "And to Jake, who kept the simplest and most important promise ever made to me. You said I'd never go hungry again, and you filled my life with more abundance than I ever dreamed possible." Their glasses clinked amidst the approving murmurs of children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren gathered around the long tables set up in the yard of the homestead, where it had all begun. Above them, stars scattered across the Oklahoma sky like diamonds, witnesses to a love that had begun with empty cupboards and a stranger's kindness, and had grown into a legacy that would continue long after they were gone. For in the end, that was Jake and Olivia's greatest achievement, not the prosperous ranch, not the community they had helped build, but the love they had nurtured from the most desperate of beginnings. A love that, like the land they had tamed together, had weathered drought and abundance, sorrow and joy, proving that even in the harshest conditions, the human heart can flourish when tended with care, commitment, and unwavering faith in tomorrow. And so their story was passed down through generations, a reminder that sometimes the darkest moments can lead to the brightest futures, and that a simple act of kindness, filling empty cupboards for a stranger in need, can change not just two lives, but create a ripple that touches countless others. In the tapestry of the American West, the story of Jake and Olivia Daniels became a golden thread, woven through the larger narrative of Oklahoma's transformation from wild frontier to settled homeland, a testament to the power of love to create abundance from emptiness, hope from despair, and family from strangers. In their final years, as they sat together watching new generations make their own way in a world vastly different from the one they had known as young people, Jake and Olivia remained as devoted as they had been on that first rainy night. Their hands, gnarled with age but still finding comfort in each other's touch, were living testimonies to a promise made and kept through decades of change, a promise that began with full cupboards but encompassed so much more. "You'll never go hungry again," Jake had vowed to a desperate young widow all those years ago. And in keeping that promise, he had helped create a feast of love that would nourish hearts for generations to come.